Good afternoon, YouTube. Thank you for coming in for another edition of my EXJW Chronicles. I thought today I would do something different and I would just do more of a story time video log. I wanted to dedicate this particular video to all the people that are questioning how they're going to leave the religion if they're in a situation where they're trying to make sense of everything that they've ever been taught, and they're kind of at a precipice of figuring out what should they do next. Today my topic is entitled How Working at Sears Helped Me to Leave the Jehovah Witness Religion. So I've shared a little bit about my background and my story, but for those of you that are fairly new or this is your first time actually listening to a video, the reason why I don't show my face is because I work in a very high profile position that precludes me from actually showing my face. My voice is not so much a big deal. I don't care about being labeled an apostate. I don't care if my family knows or not. I've made peace with who I am and what I believe a long time ago. I am a third generation Jehovah Witness. I'm an ex Jehovah Witness, but I was born into this cult. And it took me 17 years before I was able to leave the cult. I also had a highly dysfunctional family, and I went through a lot of things. My mother, mentally ill, sexually abused by her father, my grandfather, who was a presiding overseer. My father was an abusive person. I definitely believe that he has abusive personality disorder. But he was disfellowshipped 4 times. He cheated on my mother, and he married his mistress. This was a woman who, when my father was disfellowshipped and joined the army, was actually living on base, committing fraud, pretending that she was my father's wife and that her 2 children were my father's children, and they were actually going to military school. Even though my mother got remarried and had 2 more children, I don't think she ever got over what my father did. So, my brother and I, who's now deceased, and whether I say it or not, I'm just going to call him D. I dedicate every single video that I do to my brother because we were in the struggle for so many years together, and all we had was each other to talk to and get through some of the most unbearable times. It was very, very difficult to have a very dysfunctional family and then also to be in a cult. And it didn't help because some of my other videos have talked about the mental illness component of the Jehovah Witness religion. So by the time I was 15 and a half, I had a revelation, not so much about the cult, which I was still coming to terms with it not being the place that I wanted to be in when I was an adult. But I realized that both of my parents were unfit for me to live. So I did what a lot of people in my family consider to be the unthinkable. I actually confronted both of my parents and told them that I did not want to live with either one of them, that I had quite frankly had enough of their mistreatment, of my step parents' mistreatment, of the beatings and the harassment. And so, my grandmother, more so than my grandfather, at the time I had repressed that my grandfather had sexually abused me, but they actually were my only sort of saving grace. they were always so wonderful to me, especially my grandmother. I was definitely the favorite grandchild, and I was very, very, very loved and spoiled and doted over by my grandparents on my mother's side. So I really rallied, and I actually had to fight with my father. Um, he didn't initially let me live with my grandparents because he felt that it was saying that the parents weren't capable of handling me. But me and my father had a huge blow up, and he finally realized that a lot of the emotional issues that I had, and that was basically depression and being unhappy, was the fact of the things that he had done and my mother had done. So he allowed me to live with my grandparents. One thing that I can honestly say about my personality is that I've definitely always been an alpha personality, and I've always been a very principled person. So if I feel like something is not right, either for me or someone I know, I'm very, very determined to stand up for what I believe is right. So I went to live with my grandparents when I was 16 years old. But um, unfortunately, what slipped through the cracks was financial support. So now that I'm an adult with my own family and I understand how it goes, I also have stepchildren, I can honestly talk a little bit about what I know, and what I don't know. So when I went to live with my father, I'm not sure how the child support was done. But what I can say conclusively is that at the time that I was 16, I was pretty much on my own in terms of buying clothes for myself, getting my hair done, even toiletries. It was very apparent to me that I needed to work, and so that's how Sears came into the picture. Now, I've been working since I was 11 years old. Whenever I'm mentoring people or I'm talking to my staff, as an executive and boss, I always say, I've been working since I was 11 years old. But all my jobs up until I was 16 was with my family. So I babysat. My very first job was delivering papers with my brother. There was a brother in the Kingdom Hall that worked for the newspaper in the area that we lived in. And my brother got a paper route and I split it with him. So let me tell you about delivering papers, when you're young and it's below zero, because I can tell you stories about that. Throughout the years, I babysat. My aunt was affiliated with the museum in the city that we're from, and I did work with one of my cousins for a summer. So I was always kind of doing different things, but my job when I had to get working papers with my grandmother was when I was 16. And so I got a job at Sears. Now, at the time that I got my job at Sears, I had literally just been baptized less than a year, but I was a firm Jehovah Witness. Now, in my other videos, I talk about my new light that happened when I was 14. And so when you talk to people that are not Jehovah Witnesses and you talk about the process of actually leaving the religion, it's not like you wake up one day and you're like, oh, I don't want to be a witness anymore. It's actually a process. It's a process of having realizations and epiphanies, and then there's always going to be one big catalyst. And there's going to be situations that motivate you to say, you know what, this just isn't working for me. And so there was a series of situations that happened to me when I started working at Sears, but I had to do a video specifically about it because let me tell you, I have such fond memories of that time. That was like such an important and pivotal time in my life. And the only way I can really give a good analogy is that I had lived a very sheltered and repressed life before I started working at Sears. I was only around Jehovah Witnesses most of my time. The only time I wasn't is when I went to school. And it was a very controlled environment, even in school. So I never really was around people for any real length of time where they weren't Jehovah Witnesses and they didn't have that mentality and they didn't have that teaching behind them. So working at Sears when I was 16 was a big deal. It was a huge deal. And I was a very inquisitive person. I was, as I said, I was extremely intelligent, and I definitely had some abilities that I was very verbal. And those are things that I actually knew I got from being a witness, as well as going to some of the schools that I went to and taking some of the courses that I did, is that I was a very verbal person. I was always willing to talk to any and everybody. And that helped me even to this day. Like, I'm a great public speaker, and I know that I became a great public speaker because my first talk was when I was 6 years old, and I actually wrote it myself. So, these are things that help me, but I always was talking to people. So I got a job working at Sears in the men's department. And the group of people that I met, they will stay with me for the rest of my life. I always wonder where they ended up. So for the sake of being anonymous, I'm going to change the names of these people. But there were people, one woman who was my mentor, her name was, this is an alias, Marie. And Marie was from the same small town or same small country town as my maternal grandparents. She had the same accent and she had the same culture in a way that was very familiar to me. She was quite older. She was kind of like a grandmother to me, but she was also a mentor, and she was not a Jehovah Witness, but she was Christian, and she was a very devout Christian. She was also very educated, and I found her extremely entertaining and amazing. There was another person I worked with, again, an alias. His name was Fred. He was a tailor that I worked with. And I only worked after school, but I found him absolutely fascinating. He was very eccentric. He was very fun to talk to. He had a little bit of it's very difficult to describe him, but I would say he was like RuPaul. So he was someone who was very flamboyant. Not saying about his sexuality, but he was very flamboyant and he was very well dressed and well mannered. But I totally enjoyed talking to him, and he loved talking to young people. One of my favorite parts of working at Sears at that time was I was around people my age, and there were some that I still recall very fondly. There was a young man. When I first met him, I thought he was 20 years older than he actually was. He was actually my age, but he was extremely intelligent, and he was extremely focused. And I was anything but that at the time. Again, I was like a caged lion getting out of the cage for the first time and exploring the world around me. So I wasn't mature because I had lived in a repressed environment, and I wasn't focused. But he was extremely focused, and he was extremely mature, and he was someone that I still think about fondly. I know he's doing amazing things, and I'm going to call him Eli Manning. So Eli Manning was someone else that I I really enjoyed working with when I worked at Sears. There was someone else, I'm going to call him Chuck Johnson, and he was another person that was really smart, went to one of the top schools in the city that we lived in, and was a great sort of person to talk to that that gave me the insight that just because you're not a Jehovah Witness does not mean you're a bad person. So, you know, in the Jehovah Witness religion, anyone that's not a baptized Jehovah Witness or a publisher is considered, quote unquote, the world. So we look at them, or when I was in it, we looked at them like they were bad people with no standards. They were immoral, that you should not have any associations with them. And it was very difficult because I had my own job, and no one was going to stop me from having my own job because, again, I was in that sort of interesting place because of how things had wound up. So I didn't get any money. And I tell people all the time, I've actually been taking care of myself about 100% since I was 16 years old. So I had to work. And working was an important part of me getting away from this cult. I was able to use you know, me having to work as to why I couldn't attend all the meetings. And I would get out of not, you know, having the prescribed field service hours. But I want to talk about some of the catalysts that happened that I will forever remember for the rest of my life. So let's go back to Marie. So Marie was very, very important part of my life. I will remember her forever. She definitely saw me as someone who was lost, because I was all over the place at that time when I worked at Sears. I just went everywhere. I was boy crazy. I really wanted to be a witness, but at the same time, I didn't want to be confined to just talking to people that were witnesses, because I saw this big whole world in front of me. And then I started talking to Eli Manning, and he was going to Cornell University. He already knew he wanted to be in medicine or be a veterinarian. And Chuck Johnson also was going to college. And, you know, I talked about how the Cosby Show impacted me. But all of a sudden I was like, I don't want to go knocking on doors for the rest of my life. I definitely want to be a person who can definitely be a wife and a mother, but I also want to be educated, and I want to have my own career. Like, I looked at my mom, and I looked at my stepmother, and I looked at my grandparents and my grandmothers, and I didn't feel much identification with them. So I wanted to be highly educated. I definitely admired the Claire Huxtable person, but I definitely wanted to write my own ticket, and I didn't want to be confined to this organization. And talking to young people who actually, you know, were going and applying for scholarships, taking their SATs, and just seeing them being super intelligent and focused, I was like, what am I doing? I need to get myself together. So trust me, I made a lot of stupid mistakes when I was at Sears, but I also had a lot of redeeming things that happened to me. There were a lot of things that, because I had been in such a closed environment, I didn't realize that I could not trust everyone. So I talked to people believing that they were my friends, and they really weren't. But it made me, Maria was the person who helped me and assisted me and getting my life together, and I will forever be grateful to her for that. She was someone who showed me that she talked to me about a lot of things because she had been around a long time and she knew a lot of people that were Jehovah Witnesses. And she told me some stories about Jehovah Witnesses that I actually validated. I kind of talked to my grandparents and my aunts and uncles on the side to see if what she was saying was actually true. And she was like, you know, they've done a lot of stuff in the past that I don't see them as this, you know, holy, sanctified group. They're definitely known for having late parties and getting drunk, and you know, she's like, it's known around the neighborhoods that the Jehovah Witness parties are some of the most, you know, loud. And she just talked about alcohol because she didn't drink alcohol. She wasn't a drinker at all because she was a devout Christian. Although she didn't say that Christians shouldn't drink, she just said that all things in moderation. But she was like, I have a problem with people that profess to be better than the rest of the world, but they're out there drinking. And she was like, back in her time, she knew of wife swapping and people that were a little too close and what she considered to be immoral. So I found her absolutely fascinating. So she was definitely someone who actually inspired me. But I want to talk about Fred. I want to talk about Fred the Tailor because Fred the Tailor is the catalyst for me walking away from one of the biggest catalysts outside of just being at Sears that helped me to realize how the just fellowshipping and shunning was wrong. So, I was at the Kingdom Hall on a Sunday and I had went to the bathroom, and one of the elder sisters came up to me, and you know, she was talking to me as I was in the bathroom, and she said, I heard that you got a job at Sears. And I said, oh yeah, I did. She said, so the Sears down on blankly blank Avenue. And I was like, yeah. She's like, and your grandmother told me that you work in the men's department. And I said, I do. And she said, do you know Fred C? And I said, yeah, I know Fred. She's like, well, he's my brother. I was like, really? She's like, yeah. And she said, be careful because Fred is disfellowshipped. I was like, oh, well, I don't really talk to him. He's a tailor and I don't really see him too much, which was totally not true. I talked to him all the time. We used to do a lot of socializing outside of work. So, but I was covering myself because as anyone that's listening knows, the last thing that you want anyone to know if you are a baptized witness is that you're interacting with someone that is disfellowshipped. So when she said that, inwardly, I was absolutely shocked because I talked to Frank all the time. I told him all about myself. He knew that I was a Jehovah Witness. And I, you know, went back in my mind and I'm like, he asked me a lot of questions, but he never let on anything. And so that put me in a very difficult place because, I mean, we used to go over Marie's house after work and we'd sit and talk and laugh and all that kind of stuff. We'd go out to eat with him. Sometimes after work, he would drop me off at the train station. So all of a sudden, I am left with this big decision that I have to make. I work with him. I like him. I enjoy his company. He's never done anything to me. So what should I do? And I mean, like, I was really scared. I was really like, I hope I don't get in trouble because, you know, again, it's all about, and I've talked about this in other videos, but the snitching culture in the JW cult is that is one of the many reasons that I'm so glad I got out of that cult, because there's people that love to catch you in something and go to the elders. Some of it is because they think if they act like they're an enforcer or someone who is trying to keep the congregation clean, that's snitching, that's going to make them look better um, in Jehovah's eyes. And the second part is that, some people get validation from that. And it's kind of like you almost are always kind of walking around concerned, walking on eggshells, because you don't want something you said. I've heard just so many crazy stories. Not even just they thought you were talking to somebody disfellowship, but your clothing makes somebody uncomfortable. Now you have to have a meeting. Something that you may have absently said made somebody uncomfortable, so you have to have a meeting. And then the shunning part, honestly, I had never really thought about it deeply until that very situation. So I still hadn't quite decided what I was going to do, but I had to go to work the next day, and I saw Fred. And what's really funny is that I actually knew a lot of Fred's family, because when I lived with my father, he has a big family. And when I lived with my father, Fred's nieces, I knew. My father had moved, and I still went to the school that was in where his old house was located. And so what he used to do was go down the street and leave me at a house of witnesses that also had children that went to the same high school that I did. This was for the 3 or 4 months when I was 16, before I moved, to my grandparents. Well, the home of the people that I used to stay in their house and wait for like an hour before we would walk and catch the bus were Fred's nieces and nephews and his sister. So I'm like, I know, because the Jehovah Witness community is fairly small, and everybody kind of knows everybody in certain areas of the country. It's very small. I mean, it's a lot of people, but if you've been there for generations, it's, especially if you're like an African American or you're Hispanic, or you're in sort of like a smaller group, people know you and people know your family, and it takes maybe like 2 or 3 questions to say, oh, I know who that is, or I know your family. So that's how it was with Fred. So I was like, wow, how do I address this? Because I actually know more about his family than I thought. And I was just very surprised that he never told me that he was disfellowshipped or that he had any association with the Jehovah Witness cult. So I went in to work and I bumped into him. And I said, Fred, I know your sister. And he was like, I know. I was like, why didn't you tell me you worked this fellowship? And he was like, I really didn't think it would be a big deal, because, I don't think there's anything wrong with you talking to me, because we work together. And I was like, I know, but still, you could have told me. And, he kind of talked around it, but I kind of understood why he didn't. I mean, we actually really liked each other, and he was a very nice person. And he was like, so are you going to shun me now? And I was like, no, I'm not. I like you. Why would I do that? And just that simple. I was like, I can't do this. I can't be a part of this organization. Now, there was another person that actually worked at Sears, and he was a brother. He was and he definitely but he worked during the day. So I barely saw him, but I knew who he was. And I think I had a passing crush on him until I realized that I did want to be a witness. And so then I just had crushes on different ones that I worked with at Sears, because it was sort of like, again, just coming out of the cage and kind of figuring things out. So at the time that I um, was at Sears, and I worked at Sears for about 2.5 years, I dated two different people that worked there, and um, I guess flirted with maybe two or three more, where it could have potentially been something, but it never amounted to anything. Of course, now I, look at that time and such. Oh my goodness, what was I doing? Like so many golden rules. Again, now that I've, gone so far in my education and, done mentoring and going to high schools and going to different academies that they have. I'm being a little bit ambiguous here, but and talk about the do's and don'ts. It's like, don't get involved with somebody you work with. But at the time when I was 16, I had no one to tell me, especially because I was kind of being secretive, that that this is not something that you normally do. Because when it came to what my Jehovah Witness family told me, because everything was a no, I didn't listen to anything that they said, even if some of the things that they told me were in fact valid. So I mentioned Eli Manning. Now, Eli Manning was not someone that I ever had a crush on. He was someone that I admired and respected, and he was kind of like a brother to me. I know we used to kind of mess with each other. More so me looking at him more like a brother. I just remember some funny stories and things that that we used to talk about. But I'm also proud to say that I was like, if you ever become president, please remember that we used to work together. But I actually went to his graduation. He went to one of the top schools in our area, and it was really nice. Like I said, he had a full scholarship to Cornell, and he was one of the ones that we worked with that I knew he was going to go far. And whenever I thought about how I needed to get myself together and get focused and get into college and do well, it was because of someone like an Eli Manning, who had it all figured out, knew what he wanted to do, was very focused, very disciplined, and he was just an all-around just nice person to know. So he's definitely someone that, he's up there with Marie and Fred. These are not these people's real names. I tried to kind of keep them close just in case there are anyone that ever came across this and smiled, because they're like, that kind of sounds like that's someone that we thought would never amount to anything because she was all over the place. Well, guess what? Actually, I did. I actually went all the way, went to graduate school, at the top 1% in terms of what I do and my earnings. And although none of that really matters to me. It's really not about money or titles or anything like that. The most important thing is that I'm free. I have ownership in my life. I am able to live the life that I always wanted on my own terms. And beyond this being about walking away from the Jehovah Witness cult, this is about how being in a place that I probably shouldn't have been at, because, the way that closed societies are, closed religions, they don't even want you to work. But because I was able to go there and meet people who changed my life, I was never the same after that. And I wanted to share that story. I wanted to talk about how, I totally believe in the butterfly effect. And I totally believe that people can change you. I was never the same after I met these people. I mean, I eventually got laid off and really started focusing on school. And like I said in my other videos, mine wasn't a straight path. But mine, and this is really why I mentor young people who, the rest of the world says they're never going to amount to anything, because that's exactly what people said about me at certain periods of my life. And it was really because I was trying to get my head together, and because I had come from such a dysfunctional family, I had no one supporting me when I wanted to go to college, and it was hard for me to be out there on my own. But once I really got myself together, I was unstoppable. And I did everything I wanted to do and things that I never imagined that I could do. And it was because I never allowed anyone else to tell me what I could and could not be. I remember sitting with Marie one time and we were talking, and I had like the worst self image, because my self image was based on the way that my Jehovah Witness family talked about me, because I did not want to be in that religion. I felt like I was a failure. I felt like life was going to be terrible to me. I didn't feel good about myself. And she talked to me in such a loving and decent way, and I never forgot it. And she inspired me to realize that I was letting this cult control the way I saw myself. And that was wrong. And when I woke up, when I finally realized that I could be anything I wanted to be, I was on the National Honor Society. I, got scholarships for merit because of how well I did in school. I did, everything I wanted to do. And it's only because I believed in myself, and I shook off the shackles of a controlling, dominating cult. So this video is for all the people out there that are doubting themselves, or stopping themselves from living. Don't. There's nothing wrong with you. You are on the right path. And as I say all the time, continue walking. And for those group of people from Sears, I want to say thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You don't know how much that time meant to me, because it allowed me to be free. Thank you for listening to my video. Enjoy the rest of your day.